Hi everyone, my name's Luke Swat. I'm a CERN alumnus and I'm now studying philosophy, politics and economics at Wadham College, Oxford. While part of CERN, I had the opportunity to do some really cool things, some really good conversations. I had a summer school year in Oxford for a week, got a week of work experience in London as well out of it. So basically I just think it's really worth taking advantage of what's available, because loads of it's just like really useful and genuinely quite fun as well. So as you just heard in the welcome session, this masterclass you're about to watch is going to tackle a big question about climate change, and you can hear from a range of academics on how they'd approach this topic from their area of expertise. The question we're going to look at is, what is climate change and what can I do to play my part? You'll hear Dr. Kate Evans first, who's going to talk through climate change from a geographical perspective and think about the role that you can play. Following Kate, Dr. Kelly Young is going to approach the question from a business angle and look at how we can try and get business to operate in a more sustainable way. And then finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Hugh Williams, who's going to explore climate change from a political philosophical perspective, and is going to look at how you can challenge the assumptions about what's valuable in the world. So as you're listening to these experts, just make some notes on some things you find interesting, some things you might want to hear about later, some questions you've got. But yeah, for now, that's enough from me and over to the experts.
Hello and welcome to this geography taster session. My name's Kate and I'm a human geographer. Now, one of the things I find most exciting about geography is the range of different topics that it covers and the wide variety of approaches that it includes. So I'm a human geographer, so my field of expertise deals with the social world, how people understand, experience and shape the world around them. A physical geographer would approach that same world through studying its physical characteristics, so the atmosphere, hydrosphere and lithosphere, in order to understand its processes and identify patterns and changes over time. So today we're asking, what is climate change and how can I play my part? And in order for us to try and answer this question, we need to recognise that climate change poses environmental and social challenges, which is why geographers, both human and physical, have been able to contribute to our understanding of the issue. Now, climate change, or global warming as it's sometimes called, refers to changes in the global climate that are happening because of imbalances in the level of certain gases in the Earth's atmosphere. Gases such as CO2, methane and others you may have heard of, like carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide and even water vapour, are known as greenhouse gases. This means that when they're in the atmosphere, they act as reflectors of the sun's heat energy. And instead of that heat radiation being able to escape back into space, it gets trapped and is reflected back to Earth. Now, in itself, this is no bad thing, and in fact, some level of these gases is essential for regulating our global climate and for life on Earth to exist as we know it. But if the balance of gases is disrupted, for example, high concentrations of CO2 released by human activities such as burning fossil fuels, where carbon that would otherwise be safely trapped inside oil, gas and coal is released and combines with oxygen in the atmosphere to form CO2, then the insulating effect is increased, and this can lead to increased changes in the Earth's climate. Now, because of the complex atmospheric and hydrological systems, which is basically the movement of air and water around the planet, these increases in temperature and their effects aren't felt in the same way everywhere on Earth. Some places will get drier, others wetter, some hotter, others windier, and we'll even see more extreme weather and low-lying areas experiencing more floods or even becoming permanently inundated by water because of sea level rise. Research by scientists, including geographers, has helped us to understand the way that atmospheric composition, the combination of ratios of gases that make up our atmosphere, has changed over time. Using techniques from real-time temperature and atmospheric recording, so measuring levels of carbon dioxide and so on, together with what's known as proxy data from longer-term archives and techniques such as dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, ice core analysis and marine sediment analysis, we've been able to produce accurate climate records for the last 800,000 years. We can see from this chart where our emissions are coming from and which activities or sectors emit the most CO2. So energy is by far the greatest, followed by transport, then residential and commercial, so our homes and businesses, and then agriculture, including farming. So you might look at this and think, but that's large scale stuff. What can we do as individuals to change things? Well, one of the ways that have been devised for measuring our carbon impact as individuals, but also as nations, is the carbon footprint. This can tell us what type of climate impact we have, which activities are contributing to this impact, and through this, what we can do to mitigate or lessen our impact. Food miles are one way that our actions can have an impact. So food miles are the miles that add up as our food is transported from where it's first produced to our plate. In the case of ready-made produce with lots of ingredients, that means transport miles for each of those ingredients and packaging and delivery to shops or our front door, all added up. Now, next time you shop or your shopping's delivered, have a close look at the contents. Where do the fruit and vegetables come from? Are they seasonal or have they needed to be imported from warmer climates or even grown in highly energy or water intensive ways? You might need to do some further research to discover some of this information. Think about the hidden miles. One suggestion for helping us to shop in a more carbon-aware way is to make food producers include the carbon miles for their products on their labels and packaging, just as they do for calories or fat and sugar content. Now, John Urry uses the term automobility to describe our dependence on the car, which is another way that our carbon footprint is increased in terms of how much CO2 we emit. We're so dependent on our cars for our ability to travel independently anywhere, anytime we wish, that according to Automobility, that reordering of our lives and how we live and even where we live to be more climate neutral is a really big challenge. So it's not just about how much CO2 our cars emit directly, it's also about other ways that our car-centred societies make us behave and the knock-on effects of this for our climate. The recent lockdowns of 2020 and 2021 have been a really useful tool for showing us either how dependent we are on our cars or how, if we adapt our way of living, how much we could do without them in our day-to-day lives. Shopping locally, for example, or exercising in the open air without driving to a gym and so on. Some people have even rediscovered their local areas precisely because the cars and traffic danger and fumes are no longer there. One unexpectedly high source of CO2 is the internet. This is because of the energy required to power our devices and also to store the central data servers that power our search engines and host our websites. In addition to using electricity to run, these servers also generate huge amounts of heat, so they also require energy-hungry cooling systems. Now, one thing we could do to fix this is ensure that the energy we use comes from renewable sources. Something else we can do is to be more mindful of how we use the internet, not browsing needlessly, turning off our connections when we sleep so they don't continuously try and update pages, even using plug-in internet connections instead of Wi-Fi. All these things can make a difference for climate change. But far from being a luxury item that we can simply cut out of our lives, the internet has been and continues to be an essential platform for sharing information about environmental issues, including climate change, and for giving a voice to those who might not otherwise be heard by people in positions of power and influence. Some of those voices have themselves become influencers for climate change and global action. Now, normally, when you finish a presentation, you conclude. But I don't want this to be an ending. I want it to be the beginning of you taking on the challenge of climate change for yourself. So before I say goodbye, I want to open up this discussion a bit more and give the last word to some of those influencers, your peers. So for the first time in its history, in 2020, the World Economic Forum welcomed teenage changemakers to its annual meeting in Davos Klosters to boost collaboration between the generations. Here are photos of just some of those individuals, and I'll leave you with the words of others. Greta Thunberg. Since our leaders are behaving like children, we will have to take the responsibility they should have taken long ago. We have to understand what the older generation has dealt to us, what mess they have created that we have to clean up and live with. We have to make our voices heard. Amika George. For me, #free periods highlighted how a single angry teenage girl can have real political impact purely through activism, as well as the power of the internet to connect with like-minded and equally angry people. Malala Yousafzai. I hope I am not a lone voice. I am many. I hope you found this taster session interesting and that it's inspired you to look further into some of the issues we've discussed. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Sustainable Business. My name's Dr. Kelly Young and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Business and Management at Cardiff Metropolitan University. So today we'll be talking about sustainability in business and how we can play our part in encouraging businesses to be more sustainable and helping ourselves to be more sustainable as well. So what is sustainability in business? If we look at the word sustainability, we often think of it as things like Thomas Cook not going out of business, stopping bankruptcy, sustaining the business in a profitable way. Or other people think of sustainability as in protecting the environment and looking after trees and animals and, the natural environment. So which one is it? Is it preventing businesses going bankrupt and making profit, or is it looking after the environment and the world around us? Well, actually, it's a bit of both. So things like reducing plastic usage, climate change, looking after society and people, electric vehicles and trying to change the way businesses do things, trying to find new ways of growing and new ways of creating our produce, making sure we change to things that are more sustainable in terms of the produce that we use, like straws, etc. Trying to reduce how much landfill we use and trying to create what we now call circular economy. Trying to make sure that we don't throw things away as quickly as we used to, but to try and repurpose, reuse, recycle as much as we possibly can. So it definitely is a nice mix of the two. We need businesses to be profitable. We need businesses to make money, because even the most sustainable business, if it goes bankrupt, it's not really much use to us as a sustainable business either, because they need to sustain themselves. So it's a little bit of both. It's about making sure that companies are operating in the most environmentally sustainable way, whilst also ensuring that they create profit and can sustain themselves. What's really important in the images I've shown you here is that it's such a wide range and it's such a broad subject, sustainability in business. It can literally range from managers deciding to change to paper straws or start to encourage and remove single-use plastics, down to society and making sure that in their supply chain, their suppliers and the suppliers of their suppliers don't use, unfair labour, child labour, slave labour, sweatshops as we call them in the fashion industry, big factories where the living and working conditions are really terrible. So it's a really broad subject, I think much broader than most people understand. So where did this all come from? Well, even 15 years ago, before Greta Thunberg became a popular, advocate for this and started to really raise the, younger people's awareness of sustainability, Some of us were moaning about this 15 years ago. So according to Brewer and Stern in 2005, they said, in this era of serious and potential catastrophic global environmental change, inducing those pro-environmental behaviours, so getting people to change to be more environmentally friendly in individuals is a critical challenge for sustainability. So getting us as consumers to look at what we buy and to be more sustainable in the way that we approach our purchases, to be thoughtful consumers. And the Right Honourable Charles Clarke, who at the time was Secretary of State for Education and Skills, also said that the people who will succeed 15 years from now, the countries which will succeed, are those which are based on a sustainable version of the world, and that's what we should be training people to do. Now, that was 15 years ago, and we really are in the height at the moment of training people to be more sustainable. We've got sustainability built in through education systems, right through from primary school up to postgraduate, up to after degree. And you know, it is the most important thing that we can do, is to train people to be more sustainable. So sustainability is an increasingly important business topic. We're seeing more and more organisations taking sustainability seriously and trying to make more of their operations sustainable. PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the biggest auditing companies and financial companies in the UK, has created the Total Impact Measurement and Management Model, which is a model which helps organisations choose between Project A or Project B and have a look at, how that impacts not just on their financials, but on the environment as well. We've got the Sustainability Scorecard, and this is used by large organisations who use this to help them understand how their operations are impacting on the environment and their staff. We've got environment management systems, things like ISO 14001, that are being brought in to help us audit and check what we do through environmental auditing. And we've got now what's called the triple bottom line. So 15 years ago, the bottom line is what organisations called their profit, their money, their income. And now we're asking organisations to look at a triple bottom line, to look at, yes, their income and profit, that is still important, but also to look at their impact on society and people, and to look at the impact upon the planet or environment as well. So these are the new measures for business success and business strategy. So what does that mean? Well, sustainability is basically becoming more complex than just a simple green way of life. It's more than just choosing organic food or walking or taking a bicycle instead of a car. It's a much more holistic approach, which, according to the WCED, says it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that comes from the Brundtland Commission 1987. So is a small change for good better than no change at all, I guess, is one of the questions we can ask. Is a company doing a little bit better than them not doing anything at all? Is it better for us to do only a tiny little thing than not do anything at all? And that maybe is something that you can chat about with your teachers. So let's look at some examples. Tesco's, for example. One of the issues and one of the things you'll see a lot on the news, and we're trying to reduce plastics in our environment. And UK supermarkets create around 800,000 tonnes of plastic every year. So I hear a lot of students automatically say, we want to remove plastic from packaging. We want it to go packaging free. We want to make sure that supermarkets aren't using plastic where they don't need to. And I totally agree with that. But while the idea of plastic free sounds great, actually there's really complex reasons for using packaging. It stops food going off so fast, it protects it from damage so that it doesn't get thrown away before it makes its way to the customer, and it becomes more visually appealing. So actually, it's really difficult to get rid of plastic in our packaging. Also, food that goes off and gets thrown away has a higher carbon footprint than the packaging it sometimes comes in. So food waste actually can be just as damaging for the environment as the packaging in which it sits. So actually what we need to do is really focus on reducing wastage in our food systems. Of course, if plastic does get into the environment and landfill through improper disposal, then it does go into microplastics, which can cause massive amounts of damage to our ecosystem. So what's the answer? What can we do? Do we remove plastic completely from our packaging and live with the food waste? Can we reduce the food waste in some way? This is what I would like you to debate in a little while. So let's have a look at palm oil. Palm oil is very much close to my heart because I love orangutans, and basically palm oil, Mondelez International, were one of the worst offenders for using unsustainable palm oil. Palm oil is responsible for the destruction of massive amounts of rainforest. It's cut down. They cut down the rainforest to plant palm oil trees, and this, to be used for chocolate bars, crackers, Oreo biscuits. Those are named as the worst offenders by a Greenpeace report a few years ago. This extreme deforestation has pushed that wildlife into tiny corners of their habitat and forced those species, and critically endangered species as well, to the brink of extinction. Palm oil is a really versatile liquid. It also has a really good yield, so one plant can make a lot of oil. So it's not such a bad plant, it's just the way in which humans are using land and cutting down forests to make way for more farms and plantations. What we need to look for is actually sustainable palm oil, and palm oil is used in such a wide range of things. It's found in shampoos, detergents, ice creams, noodles, makeup, soap, bread, and so much more, that actually it's really difficult to move away from using palm oil. What we need to do is find a sustainable version. And finally, very quickly, we've got McDonald's. So McDonald's beef burgers are the most iconic item on their menu. They're made from 100% ground beef, and McDonald's are one of the biggest beef buyers in the world. They don't own their own farms, so they have to manage their supply chain, which they do quite well. However, one cow releases about between 70 and 100 kilograms of methane per year. It's a greenhouse gas just like carbon dioxide, but the negative effect on the climate of methane is 23 times worse than CO2. So it's really important that we manage methane from our cattle and beef industry. There's about 1.5 billion cows and bulls worldwide, and they're saying that emits about 2 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalents per year. On top of that, we're also clearing rainforests to help to make more grazing land for animals because it's such a big food industry. So according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, agriculture is responsible for about 18% of the total release of greenhouse gases worldwide, and cattle breeding is a major factor in these greenhouse gases. So what could we do? Could we eat less beef? Could McDonald's give us more options? I don't know. As consumers, knowing this might help us to have an impact on the organisation. So your task in groups today is to choose a company. I don't mind which company, any company at all. Something that you maybe use quite regularly would be good. So choose a company and decide how your business can improve how they impact on sustainability and the environment. So first of all, decide, and this is for you to decide, how your company contributes to the problem itself and what changes your business could make to reduce the impact upon this. But my next question is, what can you do? What can we do as consumers? Go back to that chosen company now and discuss with your group 3 ways that you as customers can influence your company and hopefully change what your company does. What can you do as consumers to reduce your impact on the environment? And I want you to present all of this information to your teacher. If you want to find out more, there's lots of links here. We've got a page on sustainability pathway here at the university, but more importantly, and obviously I think more interestingly, lots of videos there that you can find out more about sustainability from. I hope you've enjoyed the session. Thank you very much.
Hi there, my name's Dr. Hugh Williams and I'm a philosopher at Cardiff University, and I'm here to speak to you about this question of what is climate change and how can I play my part, obviously from a philosophical perspective. And what the philosopher does really more than anything is to try to get to the heart of issues, understand and criticise the key values, the key principles that lay, as I say, at the heart of any given subject matter. And as a philosopher who's interested in politics, what I want to do is look at this question of climate change and what one can do about it from the perspective of the values that really underlie a lot of the causes of climate change in the society we live in, and think about how it is we might think again about some of those values, how we might challenge them, and how that is maybe something you can do as individuals and as a collective. Okay, so what is climate change? Well, when I think about this question and I respond to it, I don't think so much about the science. I don't perhaps think so much about the material environmental questions. What I think about, as I suggested, is those values really that lie behind it. And when I think about climate change, well, the first thing I think that's important to acknowledge is obviously it's a man-made change. It's something that we've done as humanity. And of course, that suggests that it might be something we can reverse or do something about. When we think about greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide and the overproduction of these gases that have sort of brought about the climate emergency, well, really, we're thinking about products, if you like, of our way of life, and also the technology we use. So the things we do on a day-to-day basis. Climate change you can see as a sort of a consequence, I suppose, of those things that we do in a very unthinking way often on a day-to-day basis. And when we think about that way of life, if we think about what we do, how we respond to the world around us, then ultimately everything that we do is based upon certain key values. And it's those key values I want to go after, and I want to question, and I want to provide, as I say, some alternatives for you to think about in terms of what you might be able to do and how you can play your part in terms of arresting climate change. Before going on to those key values, I just want to go back to this. So I was thinking to myself, right, what was on your mind as a 12, 13-year-old? You know, what did you aspire to? What did you think was important? And it's a long time ago now, but I guess I can remember that at that age, maybe I still wanted to be famous or a professional sportsman. And one of the things that sprang to mind actually was this dream car. You've got a Ferrari 308 on the left and a Ferrari Testarossa on the right. And these were cars that I was quite obsessed with as a kid. And it was something that I longed for, I suppose, to be able to own and drive one of these. And what's interesting, I think, for me, and why I'm coming back to this, is in a way, this car embodies, I suppose, a lot of those values that are really important to us, or we think at least are important to us when we are children, but also as adults as well. But if you think about this dream car, well, actually, in terms of climate change, I think it maybe says a lot. You know, the mile per gallon on these cars is awful. You burn up so much petrol. It's about 9 or 10 miles per gallon as compared to maybe 50 or 60 on an everyday car. The amount of money that somebody would have to put into this, it would still cost you up to a couple of £100,000. And obviously just the idea that a luxury item like this is something that should be centrally important to somebody. As I say, I want to sort of unpack that a little bit and maybe suggest to you how something like this reflects these key values at the heart of our way of life, especially in the Western world, the UK, Europe, North America, and so forth. So when we're thinking about these core values, what are we thinking about? Well, here's some large words for you, but I'll try and break them down a little bit and get to the most important parts. So when we think about our society in Wales, we're thinking about a liberal, democratic and capitalist society. And that goes for most European countries and most states in the West and North America as well. And in fact, many parts of the world now. But what are those values that are so important, in my view anyway, in terms of this challenge of the climate emergency? Well, liberalism is the sort of set of values that's been built up over time, going back maybe 2 centuries or more. And right at the heart of liberalism, this political sort of view of the world, is that individual rights and individual preferences are the be-all and end-all almost, or certainly the most important things. So rather than thinking about perhaps the community first or the collective, in terms of liberal society, generally we tend to put our individual rights, those things that we want as individuals first. Capitalist society, well, what's so characteristic of capitalism then? Well, ultimately, capitalism, that is the economic system in which we live, the way in which we buy and sell goods and so forth, this is really sort of driven by this pursuit of profit. Buying and selling can happen in very many different ways, but what's unique about capitalism, the system we live in, is that it's done in such a way as that we're always looking to see if we can create profit. That's what drives the capitalist system. And in terms then of needing to sell in order to make money, what do we need to create? We need to create a society where consumerism is valued. So the idea that we're consuming things on a day-to-day basis, that we always want to buy more, that we always want to accumulate, that we always want the latest phone, the nicest car and so forth. That is at the heart of the capitalist way of life, if you like. And underlying that as well is this idea of growth, the idea that our economy can keep on getting bigger and bigger, that there's always more money to be made, and that people can always share in that added value that's always been created all the time. And that growth is ultimately requires more people buying things, selling things, doing things, and consuming. And so these are the core values that lie behind this idea of the capitalist society. And lastly, we've got democracy, which largely we can understand as this idea that every person has a vote. But again, one can say that actually in terms of how we operate in our democracies, we usually do that in terms of an occasional vote, maybe once every 5 years in a general election, once every 5 years in the Welsh election, also once every 5 years in terms of local election. And we're encouraged, I suppose, to vote on the idea of, well, what are our personal preferences? Which parties really reflect our interests? And what I want to suggest about all these values is that actually, in many ways, they're incompatible with, or certainly they don't encourage addressing climate change and the climate emergency in a positive way. There's a reference there, perhaps your teachers might want to go after that one, where Calvin Jones, who's a colleague of mine in Cardiff University, an economist, outlines some of the problems with this idea that you can be both sustainable and eco-friendly in your way of life and also capitalist at the same time. So let's think about some alternatives. What perhaps are those values that we might want to encourage, we might want to pursue, we might want to base a future society upon? Well, not that far into the future, obviously, because we need to address these issues now. Well, instead of this idea of growth, that what we're looking to do is to create a bigger economy all the time and get more people consuming and giving them more money to buy more all the time, into the indefinite future, there is the idea of growth, which is the notion that actually growth in itself shouldn't be seen as being valuable. Why is it important that we have more and more? And in actual fact, we may have more than enough in terms of our resources in our society. And what we need to do perhaps is just distribute those resources in a slightly fairer way. You think about people like Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, the ridiculous amount of money that he has, a response from the growth view of things would be to say, well, we have enough already. What we need to do is share those resources and put this idea of growth to the side. Rather, we need to think about how we develop our society in sustainable ways. Instead of then this idea of the liberal state, this liberal political order where we put value on individuals and individual preferences, you have then this idea of the green state, which has been written about by a philosopher from Australia, Robin Eckersley, where she talks about the green state being a political order where rather than thinking about individual preferences all the time, we think about common preferences. And instead of this idea in the liberal world in which we live in at the moment, where actually, sustainable action is viewed as a sort of preference for individuals, that it's a way of life for some people, but not for all people. In the green state, what we'd be thinking about is this idea that actually sustainability is a common good for everybody. And so all of our preferences should, as it were, cohere or should align in a way that puts those issues first, environmental issues first, and that we, as it were, go after our individual preferences once we've, as it were, prioritised the common good, this good of sustainability. And lastly then, the idea of liberal democracy, as I mentioned, it's sort of premised on this idea that we vote for our personal preferences every now and again, and then we let our representatives do the job. Well, there are other ways of thinking about democracy. Radical democracy suggests this idea that we have a democratic system which involves people in a far more regular basis in terms of the decisions that we make, that we also ensure that it's not just big businesses and multinational corporations who get access to our politicians, because that's only going to take our political decisions in one way, which is aligned to their preferences. Rather, we need to, as I say, radicalise democracy and get far more many voices involved, and that would include the dispossessed, but also as well trying to ensure that we represent the natural world in terms of our everyday politics and the priorities that we discuss. So I hope that gives you some sense of how maybe you can play your part in terms of these questions around values and underlying principles. You need to be critical. You need to think, well, why do we value what we value? Why is a dream car important to us? Are these things that we place so much value upon them, are they really that valuable for human life? What is it that makes for a good human life ultimately? Is it having a lot of things that we can use and play with and consume? Or is it perhaps alternatively about happiness, family, relationships and so forth? And we can think as well about whether current arrangements are fair. Is it right that some people, some individuals, some groups have such vast wealth and others have very little? And you can think about that in the global context as well. And in terms of our individual behaviour, well, yes, ethical consumerism is important. The idea that we try and buy goods that have been created in a sustainable and ethical way. But is that really going to be enough? And is that going to change these underlying values, these underlying structures that are so, as I've suggested, ultimately negative in terms of addressing the climate emergency? And that's where perhaps one needs to think about becoming politically active and working for the changes that we need to see in the world. Okay, plenty for you to think about there. My name and some details, contact details are on the bottom there. And if anybody's interested in philosophy, please have a look at what we offer in Cardiff. Thank you very much.
That was great. So a huge thank you to Kate, Kelly and Hugh. I thought that was a really interesting insight into climate change and the different roles that geography, art, political philosophy can all play in helping to tackle it. I hope you found that as enjoyable, as inspiring as I did, and I hope it sparked your curiosity to find out more about the different subjects you could go on to study in the future. So at the end of this whole event, you can take a look at the Independent Resources Pack, which is going to help you reflect on the various different ideas you've heard today. Some of them may have sparked your curiosity to find out more about the different subjects you could study at uni, or this masterclass might have just made you realise you're really not interested in some things at all, and that's fine. That's still useful information. It's all right. But it's now time for the information, advice and guidance of another Seren alumnus. But don't forget, you can watch this masterclass again later and take time to reflect afterwards using the resources available. But yeah, bye.